This video is brought to you by Manta Sleep. Hello my friends and welcome to an old school type video. Now, when we first arrive to planet 4546b in Subnautica, we do so in a Lifepod, a rescue vehicle Ryley jumps into just prior to the Aurora's explosion, as do quite a few others who were on board that vessel. Ryley of course survives and goes on to escape the planet, but what if he had been in one of the other life pods? Could he still have made it? Let's find out. To start, let me just break down how we are going to judge this. I'll be going life pod by life pod and putting them into 3 categories. Definitely survives, maybe survives, probably doesn't survive. There is no option where Ryley definitely doesn't survive because I believe in him. Additionally, we'll assume Ryley didn't have anyone else on board these life pods, always ending up alone. Naturally, he will suffer any equipment breakdown the original occupants did, so we'll have to see if his default gear and abilities are enough to get him out. Of course, to keep it fair, we'll assume he couldn't just jump out as soon as the life pod touched the surface, or else he could pretty easily survive most of them, up until the Aurora's explosion at least. Let's dive in. And we're starting with a really tough one here. Lifepod 2, where CTOU got stuck with Berkeley after their flotation devices failed and the lifepod sunk to 500 meters deep in the northern blood kelp zone. I'll be honest, Ryley's chances here aren't great. As a glorified janitor, it's unlikely he would be able to reconfigure the O2 system to act as a bilge pump the way you did. But even if so, he's stuck half a kilometer deep with only 45 seconds of oxygen, which is nowhere near enough to surface. Additionally, this blood kelp zone has no brain corals or bladderfish to help him surface. There aren't even any titanium deposits for him to craft a better O2 tank, so even if everything goes in his favor, his chances of surviving Lifepod 2 are unlikely. But now we move on to more survivable territory with Lifepod 3 that landed in a relatively shallow kelp forest only 17 meters under the water's surface. The 2 unnamed inhabitants attempted to rig a sea glide with a power cell, a move that seemingly backfired soon after exiting their pod. Now, assuming the lifepod was damaged by the explosion of the glide and not some internal malfunction, I don't see a reason why Ryley wouldn't easily survive in this lifepod, even if the flotation devices failed. The location isn't particularly dangerous or deep, there are plenty of resources around, and he should be safe enough from the Aurora's explosion too. I think we should flip things upside down here, literally, with Lifepod 4. This one landed close to the Aurora and was very quickly attacked by a Reaper that attempted to swallow it whole, causing significant damage. I think an even bigger issue than the big fish, however, will be the radiation. This pod landed way too close to the burning ship, and Ryley likely wouldn't have the time to craft anything before succumbing to the rads, even though the pod remained at the surface. Even if the lifepod itself was somehow a safe space, the initial inhabitants did not seem to think staying on board was an option, so he would have to set off sooner or later anyway. Alright, time to hit the bed. Dang, this base sure is bright though. Well, worry no more because I have a product I've been using for a few months now that has massively helped my sleep. Manta Sleep, ladies and gentlemen, create highly advanced and incredibly comfortable sleeping masks so you can sleep better anytime and anywhere. Is your bedroom too bright? Is it making it difficult to fall asleep? Well, I can relate, but honestly, after trying the Pro Mask, I have to say I'm really impressed with just how comfortable it is and how well it does its job. They have a wide array of masks to fit just about any need you might have. Need your eyes cooled? No problem. Want a silk one? Or one with Bluetooth audio which makes you look like a freaking sleeper from the future? Well, you should definitely check Manta Sleep out. There is no better time to think about improving your sleep. Anyway, back to it. Let's take a trip to the grassy plateaus, where we find Lifepod 6. This one is quite interesting. It crashed and seemingly sank to just over 100 meters deep with 2 people on board. They both appear to have perished in an explosion after the passenger waved a flare close to a fuel line. It appears, however, that prior to this, the lifepod was in solid enough condition since the passenger opted to stay inside rather than help gather lead. Given this state and a seemingly functional fabricator, since the crew planned to craft radiation gear, I don't think Ryley would struggle too much here. Lifepod 7 is an interesting one. After sinking about 180 meters deep in the crag field, its fabricator broke in a strange way to where it would make seemingly completely random objects regardless of what the single crew member put in. I think this one is a bit of a toss-up. The crag field has plenty of useful resources and materials, and the lifepod landed outside of the Aurora's radiation range. On the other hand, there are bone sharks around, and the fabricator seems to craft completely at random. I suppose given enough time and perseverance, Ryley might be able to get some useful crafting done, and maybe even make it out. Diving over 250 meters deep into the bulb zone, we can find Officer Danby's lifepod. He seemingly succumbed to bleeding, Kara, or probably the fact that he wasn't exactly a qualified doctor. But would Ryley? Well, the lifepod is quite deep and surrounded by bone sharks and ampules. Not good. On the other hand though, the bulb zone is rich on resources and, most importantly, even contains metal salvage, which would allow him to make better oxygen tanks. It would be a tough one, and he would have to get a bit lucky, but unless there was something else wrong with the lifepod, I think he could make it. On to Lifepod 13 now. This one was carrying the emissary Joki Kesar and crashed 177 meters deep into one of the mushroom forests. Normally, this would be a relatively easy location for Ryley to survive, however, Joki's lifepod sustained damage during atmospheric entry, and all the life support systems failed. Even if Ryley wasn't killed on impact, as Joki seemingly was, I assume the lifepod wouldn't be able to generate power or protect him in any meaningful way. His only option would be to swim to the surface, perhaps make it to the floating island for food, and then succumb to radiation from the Aurora after it spreads out far enough. Now, let's take a look at Lifepod 17 that housed everyone's favorite Aussie and some other unnamed crew. They sank nearly 100 meters deep in the grassy plateaus near an entrance to the Jelly Shroom Caves, and seemingly succumbed to a crab snake breaching the hull of the pod. Ryley's survival in this case will entirely depend on how long since the crash he has before the lifepod is rendered unusable. If he can get out, dodge the crab snakes, and return with resources that are plentiful in the surrounding area, he'll make it. If not, he won't, so it's a toss-up. If there were no crab snakes around though, this would be an easy win. And finally we arrive at Lifepod 19, the housed second officer Keen. Now this lifepod sank to the bottom of the deep sparse reef at nearly 300 meters under the surface, but seemingly didn't suffer any other damage, and Keen was even able to make it out and rendezvous with CTOU. The deciding factor here is whether Ryley's able to gather enough titanium for an oxygen tank. There are outcrops around, but his oxygen efficiency would be practically nil at this depth, so he would have to get a bit lucky. If however he can, I don't see a reason why he wouldn't be able to survive this location and go on to conquer the rest of the planet. And that brings us to the end of the list of the known lifepods that crashed onto 4546b, outside of the legendary Lifepod 5 of course, that Ryley does actually canonically end up surviving in. Of course, there were likely other lifepods out there, either crashed by the Aurora or perhaps falling far out into the void. I think it's safe to assume that our protagonist would not be making it out of those ones, and that brings us to the end of this video. I want to give a massive shout out to all of our members: Kryenda, Sander Reinhold, Kronos, Silver Soul, Master Ugwe, OGB, Yusuf Ismail Tatar, R. Robertson, MR, Philip Swoboda, Michael X757, Shitsu, Callan Whaley, Cody the Bumboy, Julian, and Thundercracks. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate the support. If you guys liked the video, maybe consider leaving a like, commenting, or subscribing. All those would be very much appreciated. And with that, I'm gonna see you legends in whatever next video I make. Bye bye.